Okay, for this video, we're going to be looking at graphing linear equations that are in slope-intercept form. So if you look at the name right here, slope-intercept form, the way the equation is set up gives you the slope, and it gives you what's called the y-intercept. Okay, so the way this looks is right here. Y equals mx plus b. Okay, you want your equation solved for y. You want it to say y equals. It's the easiest way to deal with it. So that's what we're going to look at today. So activity 1 says graph the equation, find the slope of the line, find where it crosses the y-axis, and as we do that, we're going to fill in the table. So before this point, the way we have graphed an equation, if you think back to the very first lesson we did with this, is you want to make an XY table. So I'm going to go ahead and do that for part A. And I've told you before to use the points 0, 1, and 2. Okay, and then we just plug it into the equation. So my equation is y equals -1/2 x plus 1. So I'm going to plug in 0. -1/2 times 0 plus 1. Well, 1/2 times 0 is 0, plus 1 is 1. When I plug in 1, I have -1/2 times 1. Well, half of 1 is a half, and then we need to make that negative, so we have -1/2 plus 1 equals a +1/2. And then if I plug in 2, -1/2 times 2, well, half of 2 is 1, and then I need to make that negative, so -1 plus 1 is 0. So remember, this XY table has now given me 3 points that I need to plot on my graph. So let me switch over to some graph paper here. I need to plot the point 0, 1. So over 0, up 1. I need to plot the point 1, a half, so over 1, up a half. And then the point 2, 0, so over 2, up 0. And there's my line. Now the next thing it asked me to do was to fill in the table. What is the slope of that line? So if I start right here at this point, I want to figure out directions. How do I get to another point? Well, I'm going to go from my red dot down to this blue dot. Okay, it'd be better than dealing with a half right here. So remember, slope is rise over run. Rise over run. So starting here, how far would you have to rise? Well, I would need to go down 1. So since I'm going down, that makes that a -1. And then I need to run 1, 2. I run 2, and since I went to the right, that 2 is positive. So your slope right here, -1 over 2. I'm going to come back here. I can find the right one. Okay, slope of my graph was -1/2. Okay, now look at the graph. Where does it intersect the y-axis? So remember, your y-axis is up and down. Where does your point, or where does your line cross the y-axis? Crosses right here, and that's at the point 0, 1. So I'm going to fill that in, 0, 1. So your slope is -1/2. Where it crosses the y-axis is at point 0, 1. Okay, now let's jump down and let's look at part E, let's say. Okay, if I, and we'll go through and fill in the rest of these here in just a minute, but if I make an XY table for E, and remember I told you to use 0, 1, and 2 for your x values, and I just plug it into the equation. So y equals 0 plus 2, that's 2. Y equals 1 plus 2, that's 3. Y equals 2 plus 2, that's 4. So that gives me my 3 points that I'm going to plot on my graph. Wish I could just erase part of this, but so just bear with me. It's going to look a little sloppy for just a minute. Okay, so if I plot these points, 0, 2, so over 0, up 2. 1, 3, over 1, up 3. And 2, 4, over 2, up 4. So here's your line. Okay, what's your slope? How far do you rise and how far do you run? So if I start here, I would rise 1 and I would run 1. So my slope is going to be 1. Okay, and then for where it crosses the y-axis, it crosses right here at the point 0, 2. So I'm going to erase all of this. I'm going to come back to your workbook and let's fill this in. Okay, so on part A, we had the slope was -1/2 and the crossed the y-axis at the point 0, 1. So I'm just going to put a 1 there. We just did E. The slope was 1 and it crossed the y-axis at the point 0, 2. So I'm just going to do 2. Okay. Now what I want you to figure out, let's look back at A. Look at your equation and then I want you to look at your slope. Do you notice any similarities between your equation and your slope? Okay, well I notice my slope was -1/2 and that's the number right here. Okay, down on part E, my slope was 1. Technically, that's the number right here in front of the x, right? So I want you to make a little note. Okay, the slope is always in front of the x. Okay, so on B, what's in front of your x? Well, I have a negative, so that means my slope would be a -1. Same thing for C. For D, what number is in front of your x? 1/2, so that's your slope. F, what number is in front of the x? There's nothing there. Technically, it's a 1. For G, what number is in front of the x? 1/2. For H, -1/2. So really, really easy just looking at the equation to pick out what your slope is. Okay? Now, let's look at the other number, where it crosses the y-axis. So A crossed at 1, E crossed at 2. So what do you notice with their equations? Okay, well you should notice that it's that other number that's tacked on to your equation. Okay, the other number tacked on. So part B, what's the other number that's tacked on? It's a +2. So it's going to cross your y-axis up at 2. For C, notice how it says a -2. So that means it's going to cross the y-axis at -2. Okay, D is going to cross at a +1. We did E already. F will cross at a -2. G at a -1. And H at a -1. Are there any more? Yeah, there's more down there. We'll do those in just a second when I can scroll. Okay, but what we call this, where it crosses the y-intercept is, where it crosses the y-axis is called your y-intercept. So I want you to write that down kind of over here to the side. A definition, where the line crosses the y-axis. Okay, where the line crosses the y-axis. So let me scroll down and we'll finish filling in this table here. We have I, and then on the next page we have J. So I, what's your slope? Your slope is always the number that's right in front of the x. So in this case it's a 3. Where it crosses the y-axis will be that other number tacked on, +2, so that means it's going to be a +2. For J, your slope, again, it's the one right in front of the x, so that's a 3. And where it intersects the y-axis is that other number, and since it says -2, that means it's going to be a -2. Okay? All right, so we kind of already answered K. Do you notice any relationship between the slope and the equation and then where it crosses the y-axis and the equation? We already kind of wrote those up into the side. Okay, so what I want you to do really quick, let's come down right here to number 3. You may have to flip over a couple pages. Okay, I really want to dive into what this form looks like. Okay, first of all, this form is called, again, it's the title of the lesson, slope-intercept form. You're going to hear that a lot, so you can get used to this terminology, slope-intercept form. Okay, and what it looks like is that's this right here, y equals mx plus b, y equals mx plus b. That is slope-intercept form. When your equation says y equals, m is your slope, okay, that's in front of the x, b is your y-intercept, it's that other number tacked on. So, A, how does the value of m affect the graph of the equation? First of all, I want you to write that m is the slope. And how does it affect a graph? It affects the steepness of the line. Okay? Value of b. B is your y-intercept. Okay, and in actually, we'll just tack this on. How does that affect the graph? It tells you where the line will cross the y-axis. Okay, so I could give you any equation that is in this form, that is in slope-intercept form, and you can very easily tell me what the slope is, how steep it's going to be, and what the y-intercept is. Where is that line going to cross the y-axis? Just by looking at the equation. Now, the main thing is that it has to be in this form. It has to say y equals. That y has to be all by itself on that side of the equation. Okay, so I'm coming down to the 4.4 practice page. We're just going to look at 1, 2, and 3 right now because I want to show you something real quick. All it says is find the slope and the y-intercept of the graph. So on number 1, first of all, is it in the right form? Is it in y equals mx plus b? Yes, the y is by itself. So m, your slope, is what's in front of the x. What's in front of the x? A -3. Your y-intercept is that other number tacked on. In this case, it's a 9. That one was really easy. Okay. Number 2, is it in the right form? Does it say y equals mx plus b? Now, some of you may think not because it's backwards. Notice what's with the x comes last, but it does say y equals, so yes, it's in the right form. Now, be careful. What's your slope? Remember, your slope is what comes directly in front of the x. Okay, directly in front of the x is a -2/5. Be careful not to miss that 2/5, or the negative, I'm sorry. And then your y-intercept is that other number tacked on. In this case, it's a +4. Now, on number 3, is it in the right form? No, my y is not by itself. Now, we're going to get into this a little bit in more detail later, but we want to get the y by itself. Okay, we've done this a little bit. If I want the y by itself, I have to get rid of the 6. And how do you get rid of a 6? A +6? You subtract it. So y equals, remember, you cannot combine this because the 8 has an x and the 6 doesn't, so it just stays 8x minus 6. Now you're in the right form. Your slope, what's in front of the x, is the 8. Your y-intercept is that other number tacked on, a -6.